We are always taught that human endeavors have this strict, predictable shelf life.
Right.
You look at the great sprawling empires of the ancient world.
Right, like Rome or the Maya.
Exactly. Rome collapsed, the Maya faded away, ancient Egypt was just, well, lost to the sands. It feels like entropy always seems to win.
Yeah, eventually things fall apart. That's just the rule of history.
But today, we're looking at a culture that essentially trapped its own conquerors, which is wild. And they kept an unbroken linguistic thread alive for, get this, 50 centuries.
It's a massive number.
It really is. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today's source material is a really comprehensive breakdown of Chinese archaeology and cultural history.
And there is a lot to cover here.
For sure. Our mission for this deep dive is to figure out exactly how a civilization manages to survive for millennia without losing its core identity. Like, how does anything last that long?
Yeah, it is a staggering timeline for you to wrap your head around. We are looking at a history that doesn't just survive regime changes or, devastating wars. It actively absorbs them. So the goal today isn't just to verify the timeline, but to understand the actual socio-political mechanics. How does a culture maintain its identity through the absolute unpredictable chaos of human history?
Okay, let's unpack this, because to even begin to comprehend a timeline that massive, we actually have to start quite small. Down in the dirt, literally.
Yeah, the best archaeology usually starts there.
Imagine a farmer,
Yep.
right, just going about his business. He's digging in a field, and he pulls up a turtle shell.
Which, out of context is just natural debris, just a piece of trash, really.
Exactly. But upon closer inspection, the shell is covered in deliberate, intricate carvings, like thousands of symbols.
And archaeologists eventually uncovered massive caches of these, not just turtle shells, but bones, dating all the way back to the Shang dynasty. So we're talking roughly 1600 to 1046 BC.
Right, so we are well into the late Bronze Age here. And what fascinated me in the historical data wasn't just that they were carving symbols, but why they were doing it.
It wasn't just for art.
No, this was state-sponsored divination. But it wasn't some fringe, mystical parlor trick. It was a highly centralized mechanism for political power.
Precisely. The Shang kings essentially acted as the head shamans of the state.
Oh, wow, so the king is the shaman.
Exactly. They used these oracle bones to communicate with the ancestors and the divine. They were seeking answers to incredibly practical, high-stakes questions.
What kind of questions?
Things like, will the harvest fail? Or should we attack this neighboring tribe? Even personal things for the royal family, like, is the queen's pregnancy going to be successful?
And the mechanism for getting the answer is what really caught my attention. They didn't just, carve the question and wait for a sign.
No, it was a very physical process.
They would take a heated bronze rod and apply intense fire to the back of the bone or shell, like until the thermal stress caused it to literally fracture.
Yeah, the heat makes it crack.
And they believed the shape and direction of those cracks were the direct responses from the ancestors. So it's basically ancient texting, but with fire.
Ancient texting with fire. I like that.
Yeah, and the read receipts dictated state policy, warfare, agriculture, everything.
What's fascinating here is how organized this supposedly chaotic ritual actually was. The king's legitimacy literally depended on his ability to, text the ancestors effectively and interpret those cracks.
Right, he had to be good at reading the burn marks.
Yes. But beyond the ritual itself, it was the bureaucracy surrounding it that is so crucial. They didn't just crack the bones and throw them in a pile.
What did they do with them?
They meticulously recorded everything. The date, the diviner's name, the specific question, the interpretation of the crack,
Wow.
and sometimes even the ultimate outcome. Like they'd go back and carve whether the prediction actually came true.
So they were building early data centers.
Uh-huh.
They have these massive pits filled with archived oracle bones. It's rigorous data collection wrapped in a spiritual framework.
Yeah, and that data collection required a highly standardized system of symbols. It required a dedicated class of scribes and administrators who all agreed on what specific carvings meant.
Which brings us to the carvings sitting right next to those fire cracks. Because cracking bones with thermal shock is a vivid image, sure, but the real shocker is the unbroken thread of the script itself.
The language.
Yeah. Here's where it gets really interesting. Modern Chinese speakers can look at those 3,000-year-old turtle shells and still visually recognize the architectural logic of some of those symbols today.
It is arguably the most resilient linguistic phenomenon in human history.
That's insane to me.
Now, to be clear, A modern reader cannot just pick up a Shang Dynasty bone and read it fluently like a morning newspaper.
Right, it's not exactly the same font.
No, the characters have undergone massive stylistic evolution over the millennia, but the fundamental visual logic survives.
Right, like take a concept like sun or mountain.
Yeah.
You can look at the pictograph carved into a Bronze Age turtle shell,
Yeah.
right? And you can place it side by side with the standardized characters developed in later dynasties, all the way down to modern script. And you can draw a direct, visible line of evolution.
You really can.
Imagine finding a receipt buried in the dirt from 1000 BC and being able to recognize the handwriting and the root words.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at what happened to other ancient titans to truly appreciate this continuity. Think about ancient Egypt.
Okay, yeah.
They had immense infrastructural power and a highly complex writing system and hieroglyphs, but that chain of transmission was completely severed.
Because the administration changed. I mean, Egypt was conquered by the Greeks, then the Romans.
Exactly.
The ruling class just stopped using hieroglyphs, the scribal traditions died out, and eventually the language became totally unreadable. For centuries, absolutely nobody on Earth could read a single word of Egyptian.
Not until the Rosetta Stone was discovered and decoded, right? The administrative operating system of the culture was just overwritten.
Overwritten. That's a great way to put it.
And the same happened with the Roman Empire. Latin fragmented, it evolved into the Romance languages, and basically died out as a spoken, living language of a unified state.
Right, the political center collapsed, and the language fractured with it.
But in China, the script was the administration. The written character became the universal glue.
So even if people couldn't speak to each other.
Yes, even if two people from different regions spoke entirely mutually unintelligible dialects, they could read the exact same administrative document.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
It decoupled the written word from phonetic speech, which is just a phenomenal administrative hack for running a massive, diverse empire.
It's the only way it could have worked, really.
But wait, hold on a second. I'm doing the math here.
Uh-oh.
You said the Shang Dynasty turtle shells, our earliest massive cache of written records, are roughly 3,000 years old.
Roughly, yes.
But the core claim of this whole deep dive, the number that gets thrown around constantly when you talk about China, is a 5,000-year history.
Ah, yes.
So we are missing 2 entire millennia. Where are the missing 2,000 years?
It's the obvious discrepancy, and it's one that historians debated for decades. If you strictly define the start of history as the moment people start archiving written sentences, then yeah, you are looking at a 3,000-year timeline.
Right, the turtle shells.
But to bridge that 2,000-year gap, archaeologists realized they had to shift their metric. They had to look past the search for script and start looking at the Earth itself.
Right, infrastructure.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the Liangzhu culture. Looking at the excavation reports from the source material, down in the Yangtze River Delta, we are stepping back past the oracle bones to around 3,300 to 2,300 BC.
Deep time.
Yeah, deep time. And we aren't just talking about a few hunter-gatherers leaving behind some, slightly advanced pottery. They found evidence of massive state-level hydraulic engineering.
The Liangzhu water management system is a perfect example of why the timeline gets pushed back. Archaeologists uncovered a network of dams, levees, and canals.
Huge ones.
Massive, the kind that required moving millions of cubic meters of earth.
See, you don't move millions of cubic meters of earth with a loose coalition of egalitarian farmers.
No, you certainly do not.
That requires centralized authority. It requires a tiered society where leaders can command and, crucially, feed thousands of laborers who are not actively farming for themselves.
Precisely. It implies a highly complex socio-political organization. And beyond the civic engineering, the Liangzhu tombs show extreme specialization of labor.
Oh, the jade artifacts.
Yes, they crafted incredibly intricate jade artifacts, specifically the Kong cylinders and bai discs.
And jade is not easy to work with.
Not at all. Jade is exceptionally hard. You can't just carve it with a bronze knife. It requires abrasive sand, immense patience, and dedicated artisans who spend their entire lives mastering the craft.
Which, again, points to a society wealthy enough to support a luxury artisan class. Like, they didn't have to farm, they just polished jade all day.
Right. And those jade artifacts were highly standardized, buried in the tombs of the elite. This suggests a shared, complex spiritual framework and a strict social hierarchy.
So they were already very advanced.
This raises an important question, though. How do we define civilization?
Yeah.
The Liangzhu didn't leave us turtle shells covered in script, but they left us an urban center, massive civic infrastructure, standardized ritual objects, and distinct social classes.
So the roots were already there.
Exactly. The architectural and cultural foundations of what would eventually become dynastic China were already poured 50 centuries ago.
You don't just suddenly invent a fully formed, highly bureaucratic Shang dynasty out of thin air.
No, it was the culmination of thousands of years of prior state building.
Okay, so the foundation is 5,000 years old. The unbroken linguistic thread is 3,000 years old. But, having deep roots and a good writing system doesn't make you invincible.
True.
Like we said earlier, Rome had deep roots. Egypt had monumental infrastructure. They fell. China didn't exist in a vacuum. Its history is punctuated by unimaginably devastating civil wars, fractured states, and massive external invasions.
Yeah, the timeline is basically a cycle of unification and violent fragmentation. Dynasties rise with immense centralized power, and then they collapse in spectacular chaos. But the fascinating part is what happens during those collapses, particularly when foreign forces completely overrun the territory.
This is the part of the historical record that completely subverts normal imperial logic.
How so?
Well, typically, to the victor go the spoils, right? The conqueror rolls in, imposes their language, their gods, and their administrative system on the conquered. That's how empires usually operate.
Usually, yes. But when you look at the major foreign conquests of China, specifically the Mongol Empire establishing the Yuan dynasty, or later the Manchus establishing the Qing dynasty, that typical imperial logic short circuits.
It really does.
Yeah.
Because these were formidable nomadic and semi-nomadic cavalry
They're
forces.
extremely formidable.
They breached the defenses, defeated the existing armies, and took the throne. They won.
They won the war. But you can't govern a massive, deeply entrenched agrarian society from horseback.
Right. If you're a Mongol conqueror, you've just taken over a territory with tens of millions of farmers. How do you tax them? How do you manage the flood control on the Yellow River? How do you organize famine relief?
You can't just use swords for that. You need the existing infrastructure. And that infrastructure was entirely run by a deeply entrenched class of scholar bureaucrats.
The guys who passed the exams.
Exactly. And they operated using the Chinese script and Confucian administrative principles. The conquerors quickly realized that the only way to actually extract wealth and maintain order in China was to use the Chinese administrative operating system.
So the conquerors essentially had to hire the conquered to run the empire.
Yes. And to manage those bureaucrats, the conquerors themselves had to learn the language. They had to understand the political philosophy.
The culture was a trap.
A very effective one.
It was so highly refined and brutally effective at managing millions of people that foreign rulers were inevitably absorbed by it.
It is the ultimate historical example of assimilation working in reverse. The Manchus, for instance, established the Qing dynasty and ruled for nearly 3 centuries.
That's a long time.
It is. And over time, while they tried to maintain their distinct ethnic identity, they fully adopted the Chinese bureaucratic system, the court customs, and the language.
Because they had to.
Right. The civil service examinations, that rigorous testing system used to select government officials based on their knowledge of classical Chinese texts, that continued to be the primary engine of state power.
That exam system is the perfect mechanism for this cultural survival. Because if a foreign conqueror wants competent administrators, they have to use the exam.
There's no other way.
And if an ambitious person wants power, they have to pass the exam. And to pass it, you have to spend your entire life mastering the ancient texts, the philosophy, and the continuous literary tradition.
Exactly. It forces every generation, regardless of who actually sits on the emperor's throne, to perfectly replicate the cultural core.
That is wild.
The historical texts we are examining use a very specific metaphor to describe this phenomenon. Think of Chinese history not as a building that can be knocked down, but as an eternal river.
An eternal river. I love that. The water keeps flowing in its distinct, deep path, carved out over millennia.
Exactly. The dynasties, the emperors, the invading armies, they are just the people steering the boat on the surface of the river.
The captain changes.
Right. Sometimes a completely foreign crew boards the ship by force and takes the wheel, but they are still sailing on the same river dictated by the same currents.
Because they can't change the river itself.
No, they don't change the composition of the water, and they certainly can't force the river to flow backward. The cultural current is simply too strong.
So what does this all mean? It means that a 5,000-year history is not just some poetic exaggeration to put on a plaque.
Not at all.
It is a literal description of an administrative and cultural gravity so intense that it pulled everything, even his own conquerors, into its orbit.
Which is incredibly rare.
Yeah. The physical empires fractured and broke constantly, but the software running the society never actually crashed.
And that continuity provides a totally different lens through which to view human history for you to ponder. Instead of looking at the past as a graveyard of disconnected, failed experiments, we are looking at a living archive.
A living archive, yes.
An archive that has been compiling data, refining its language, and maintaining its core architecture since the Bronze Age.
Well, we've tracked that archive today. We started with the state-sponsored fire texting on Shang dynasty bones, which I still think it's amazing.
It's a great image.
We traced the visual logic of a language that refuses to die, dug deep into the hydraulic engineering of the Liang Zhu, and explored the bureaucratic trap that swallowed conquering armies whole.
We covered a lot of ground.
But, as with all deep dives into archaeology, the dirt hasn't given up all its secrets yet. We can't end without talking about the big mystery.
Right. The timeline has one major, glaring question mark remaining.
We talked about the Shang dynasty being the anchor point for the written word. But historical texts, which were compiled much later, insist there was a fully formed dynasty that came even before the Shang.
Yes, the Xia dynasty.
According to the classical texts, the Xia was the very first dynasty, like the bridge between the late Neolithic cultures like the Liang Zhu and the highly organized Bronze Age of the Shang.
But the Earth hasn't yielded the receipts yet. We don't have the definitive, undeniable caches of written records for the Xia in the same way we have the oracle bones for the Shang.
So it's a ghost.
It exists in this fascinating liminal space between history and myth. Is it a later political fiction invented to legitimize the concept of changing dynasties?
Or is it a real, breathing civilization whose archives are just buried a little deeper, waiting to be found?
It forces us to confront how much of human capability is still hidden. If a culture possesses the resilience to quietly absorb its own conquerors and keep a continuous written tradition alive for 3,000 years, it makes you wonder.
I wonder what else is out there.
Exactly. What other massive chapters of civic engineering, lost languages, and ancient statecraft are sitting quietly beneath our feet, just waiting for a farmer's shovel to strike a stone and force us to rewrite the timeline all over again?
Now that is a thought to leave you with. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.